Welcome to episode 160 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's April 9, 1978. Herning, Western Jutland, the Danish third tier. And out walks Bobby Moore. Not at Wembley, not at Upton Park, not in a World Cup, not even in England. The captain of England's only World Cup winning side is making his debut for Herning Fremad, a provincial club from the Danish third division. That is one of those football moments that sounds invented until you stare at it long enough and realize that, yes, the sport really does produce scenes like this. Because Bobby Moore was not just any aging footballer trying one last address. He was Bobby Moore, West Ham captain, FA Cup winner in '64, European Cup Winners' Cup winner in '65, England's captain in '66, 108 caps, 90 times captain, and by Pelé's own estimate, the best defender he ever faced. And yet this story only works because greatness has a second half. Moore in '78 was not the marble statue. He was 36, long gone from England duty, carrying the strange burden that comes to players who were once too famous to imagine as ordinary. The legs go first, then the aura begins to flicker, and then one day the greatest defender in English history is trying to read the game on a small ground in Jutland. That is not a fall exactly. It is something more human than that. It is time. But how did we get here? To understand why Bobby Moore ends up in Herning, you have to understand Denmark. Because Danish football is old, very old. The DBU was founded in May 1889, making it the first national football association on mainland Europe. And Denmark was early enough, organized enough, and serious enough to matter. But Danish football also carried a contradiction for almost a century. It loved the game, organized the game, exported talent from the game, and still clung stubbornly to the amateur ideal. Professionalism, which England had embraced in the 1880s, remained effectively outside the Danish system until 1978. That meant Denmark kept producing players better than the structure that housed them. You could see that contradiction very early. Niels Middelboe, one of great pre-war Danes, went to Chelsea in 1913 and became the club's first foreign player. He was emblematic of the type, elegant, respected, good enough for a major stage, and still coming out of a culture that preferred amateur purity to professional realism. After the Second World War, the pattern intensified. Denmark won Olympic bronze in 1948 and silver in '60. At the same time, many of the country's best players left. John Hansen went to Juventus. Carlo Prast went to Juventus too, and under the old rules, paid for it by losing their Denmark career. Carlo Hansen moved abroad as well. Later, Harald Nielsen became a star in Italy, especially at Bologna. Danish football kept proving it had players. It just couldn't keep them. Now and then the old system still produced a flash of romance. Denmark's route to the final tournament of the 1964 European Nations Cup was peculiarly unfortunate, built largely through a three-match struggle with Luxembourg, with Ole Madsen scoring heavily along the way. Then, in 1972 at the Olympics, Denmark beat Brazil 3-2, with Allan Simonsen scoring twice before his move to Borussia Mönchengladbach became part of the next export wave. But by the 1970s, the old model was looking threadbare. Denmark's domestic game was admirable, traditional, earnest, and increasingly behind the times. The best players left. The national team had long been cut off from professionals abroad. The league lacked money, ambition, and modern scale. And that is where the reformers arrived. Harald Nielsen helped press the case for change. Helge Sander from Herning became one of the most energetic agitators for a professional future. Hans Bjerg Petersen and the club's association pushed too. In 1978, after years of tension and argument, paid football was finally introduced into Denmark. The dam broke, almost a century late. And once that happened, Herning Fremad saw the opportunity before many others did. This was an ambitious club from an ambitious town, and Herning's idea was brilliant in its audacity. If Danish football had entered the age of money and publicity, then do something impossible looking. Do something that makes the whole country turn its head. So they went and got Bobby Moore. That is the part people remember best, because the mismatch is so delicious. A former World Cup winning captain in Denmark's third division, not in Copenhagen, not at a giant club, but in Herning. But that was exactly the point. This was not really about asking a 36-year-old Bobby Moore to transform the table by himself. It was about forcing Denmark to imagine a bigger football life. If Bobby Moore could be here, What else might now be possible? And then came the debut. Herning Fremad's first Bobby Moore match ended in a 1-0 defeat to Holstebro. The old magic didn't suddenly return in full. Moore read the game beautifully, organized, pointed, instructed, gestured, and brought a kind of old authority to everything around him. But he couldn't simply rewind the body. Local fascination was huge. The result wasn't. That in miniature is the whole story. But so what? In purely sporting terms, Bobby Moore didn't transform Herning Fremad. He played only 9 matches. In that stretch, the club's record was 2 wins, 2 draws, and 5 defeats. He barely moved the competitive needle, but he massively raised the club's profile and helped make professional football feel real, visible, and marketable in Denmark. That matters, because revolutions in football are often misremembered as tactical first and cultural second. In reality, they are often cultural first. Bobby Moore didn't make Herning better enough. He made the horizon bigger. He made sponsors, supporters, local businessmen, and football people think in a new register. As they say in Denmark, he helped money football enter Danish arenas successfully. And once professionalism had been accepted, another old barrier fell too. Danish players abroad could again be selected for the national team. Then came the next hinge. In 1979, Sepp Piontek took over, with more authority than earlier Denmark coaches had enjoyed. What followed was not caused by Bobby Moore, of course, that would be silly, but it belonged to the same opening of the mind. Denmark re-entering modern football. From there came the climb towards the great teams of the 1980s, and eventually the absurd glory of 1992. What about Herning Fremad? Moore's stay was brief, but the club's climb came soon after. Herning won promotion to the second tier in 79, reached the top flight for the first time in 82, and much later, in 99, merged with IKAST to form FC Jutland. So yes, the club Bobby Moore briefly served in the Danish third division now lives on inside one of Denmark's modern powers. What about the league around them? Lyngby were among the early pioneers of the professional turn. Brøndby were the club that commercialized and scaled the new order fastest, becoming champions in the 1980s. FC Copenhagen came later, in 92, as the capital city superstructure of the post-Euro era. And Midtjylland, from the Herning line, would become a different kind of modern Danish force altogether. And Bobby Moore himself? There was no fairy tale last act. Herning was one of the final curious stations in a career whose brightest days were long behind him. That is partly why this story has such emotional pull. It lets you keep 2 truths in the same frame. The man who lifted the World Cup at Wembley and the man who turned up in Jutland trying to make one more football chapter mean something. Before we go, 3 things to take away from April 9, 1978. First, Bobby Moore and Herning mattered because it was absurd on purpose. A former World Cup winning captain in the Danish third tier was a publicity coup, yes, but also a statement of intent. Second, the move only makes sense inside Denmark's longer football contradiction. A nation with old football roots, real talent, and stubborn amateur traditions that held back its own modern growth for decades. And third, Moore did not change Herning Fremad's results much. What he changed was imagination. And in football, imagination is often the first thing that has to turn professional. On this day in 1978, Bobby Moore made his debut for Herning Fremad in Denmark's third division. And even if he barely changed the table, he helped change the way Danish football thought about itself. That is all for episode 160 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a 5-star rating, and share it with a football friend. Tomorrow, go to April 10, 1910, when a clash of kit colors at Parque Central in Montevideo helped give Uruguay its sky blue identity. See you then.